It is my very great pleasure to welcome not only one, but two guests of honors for our opening keynote tonight, with the title of Responsibility and Sustainability in Shared Authority, a very timely title. I was thinking, I think we met in 2016 for a lecture. It was in Fort Collins, Colorado. And the talk that you gave about digital public history is still very, very much present. And I still use and admire your work 8 years after. So it's saying a lot about, your bio that I'm going to read about in a minute. So Rebecca Wingo is Associate Professor of History at the University of Cincinnati in the US, where she's also the Director of the Public History. She has studied houses, homestead in the West, houses on the Crow Reservation, and the use of eminent domain to displace Black citizens for highway construction in the 50s and 60s. She was also the lead editor of an open access volume called Digital Community Engagement, Partnering Communities with the Academy, that won the 2021 Book Award of the NCPH. And I've been using that book in my class. I highly recommend that book, which is open access too, even better. She's currently working on digital archiving projects with 3 different communities: Rondo, that you're going to hear more about tonight, a displaced Black community in Minnesota. I'm sorry for the name. Wyandot Nation, a tribe in Oklahoma, and the Apasaloke. Okay, Apasaloke Nation, so sorry, a tribe in Montana. She has 2 in-progress manuscripts, Frame Housing and Photography on the Crow Reservation in American History in 15 photographs. We also have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Marvin Roger Anderson tonight. Very much welcome in Luxembourg for your first trip to Luxembourg. He has traveled all around the world and now Luxembourg, and cannot imagine a better place than the Rondo neighborhood in his hometown of St. Paul, Minnesota. After college, law school, and the Peace Corps, he returned to Minnesota to earn an MA degree from the University of Minnesota School of Library Science. In 1980, the Minnesota Supreme Court appointed you state law librarian, a position you've held until retiring in 2002. Mr. Anderson also co-founded the community organization called Rondo Avenue, that you're going to hear more again tonight, and the Rondo Center of Diverse Expression. So we are very, very lucky to have tonight 2 partners who have been working on a public history collaboration. And we will discuss, again, responsibility, sustainability, and shared authority. Thank you both for this keynote.
Hi, it's so wonderful to be here tonight. And my community partner, my mentor, my friend, Mr. Anderson, is going to join me here to tell you a story about Rondo, a neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota, and our project called Remembering Rondo. So there are 2 main characters in tonight's story. The first is Mr. Anderson, who has traveled all around the world and still can't imagine a better place than Rondo. And in 1982, let's see if I'm better at this, he co-founded Rondo Avenue Incorporated with his best friend, Mr. Smaller. And I'm sure Mr. Anderson could tell you a more accurate version of the founding, but my version goes like this. So Mr. Anderson was at a different neighborhood at a festival called Grand Old Days, and this white guy, and I always imagine he was inebriated, and every time I'll tell the story, he gets drunker and drunker. So he walks or staggers past Mr. Anderson like sloshing a beer, and he says, "Grand Avenue is the best neighborhood in St. Paul." And Mr. Anderson thought to himself, no, it's not. So then he established RAI to preserve and celebrate the history of Rondo, the heart of St. Paul's African-American neighborhood. He organized the first Rondo Days in 1983 to rival Grand Old Days, which should tell you a little bit about the man's character. And the other character in tonight's story is Rondo. In the 1950s, the Minnesota Department of Transportation began construction on a stretch of I-94 that would connect the downtowns of Minneapolis and St. Paul. An estimated 1,600 Black and brown communities were destroyed by highway construction in the 1950s and 60s. Mindy Fullilove, an urban psychologist, describes the resulting diaspora as root shock, or a traumatic stress reaction related to the destruction of one's emotional ecosystem. And that emotional trauma lasts for generations, but so too do the economic, political, and social ramifications. Minority communities around the nation faced similar destruction and robbery at the hands of highwaymen. Rondo was one of these neighborhoods. And as for me, I'm your narrator this evening. And our story has high points where it seemed like we could do no wrong, and it has low points where we lost it all. But like any good tall tale, if you listen closely, there's a moral, a lesson or two that you can take back home. I met Mr. Anderson in a coffee shop near Macalester College when I was hired as a postdoc in digital liberal arts to start a program that did not yet exist. I needed to develop a class that would demonstrate the power of digital scholarship while also generating a large community impact, so no pressure. I wanted to teach something called a history harvest. And the History Harvest is a community-based digital archive built upon Michael Frisch's gift to the public history world, a shared authority. A shared authority occurs when historians invite citizen scholars, or the public, to co-create history. The History Harvest emboldens community members to use their belongings to tell their own stories. The objects that we keep as heirlooms, when viewed collectively, they tell the story not just of who we were, but also who we are and who we hope to become. And when you think about how archives have historically marginalized non-white, non-male voices, it's really quite something. So there I was at this coffee shop where a colleague had arranged like a meet cute between Mr. Anderson and I was so nervous. I was like sweaty armpit nervous. And so I introduced myself, and the moment he said, "You must be Becca," there's like a cosmic shift. And I had no idea how much my world would change. I did this last time we presented. So remembering Rondo was a go. The first thing I needed to do was learn. There's one moment that seems to define Rondo: the construction of I-94. I did not know that the Federal Highway Act of 1956 wreaked havoc on communities of color around the nation. I did not know that the history of highways was steeped in racism and red lighting. I did not know that despite a perfectly good northern route, MnDOT chose to build through Rondo, the neighborhood's main business district. I did not know that MnDOT used eminent domain to displace over 700 families and 300 businesses, completely undercutting the entire economic ecosystem and giving nothing back in return. I did not know that they justified this by declaring Rondo a slum. I did not know yet that none of that defines Rondo at all. But tonight, you don't have to listen to me tell you about all the things I don't know. It's a long list. Tonight, you will learn about Rondo from Mr. Rondo himself. And tonight is rare. Community partners hardly ever come to conferences. And yet, projects like Remembering Rondo, which includes an archive, a map of Rondo's historic businesses, panels at a commemorative plaza, and whatever else Mr. Anderson asked me to do, they only exist because community partners participate in the production of their history. And I presented about Rondo 37 times. 37. Only one of those was with Mr. Anderson. And only one of those was to Mr. Anderson. The omission of community partner voices by default continues to marginalize and silence them even as we ironically seek to amplify them. And that is why tonight is rare. Now, Mr. Anderson is not one to shy away from an audience. So when I told him about this talk, he said, Luxembourg? I've never been to Luxembourg. Can I come? And I told him that not only could he come, but he could share the stage. And I just needed to figure out how to pay for it. Now, my university is lucky to have the Taft Research Center, which is an endowed humanities center with leadership that supports community work. And they funded his entire trip. So when you leave here tonight thinking, man, that was the coolest talk ever, it will be because of Mr. Anderson. So without further ado, here is Mr. Anderson, who will give you a history of Rondo through one of the objects that he brought to our first history harvest in 2016. It's very sensitive.
Good evening. Good evening. Hello. Good evening. Thank you so much. It is a real pleasure for me to be here, and I can't tell you what a young man or old man like I am now from Rondo would wind up in the city of Luxembourg before some historians. They would have looked at you and said, "Are you out of your mind?" And I'm here, and I've been enjoying myself. And it's been a wonderful experience for me to be a part of this wonderful conference. And what I've heard so far validates so much that is a part of the role that I've tried to play in the Rondo community for the last 40 some odd years. The idea that we could share authority, that a university or someone outside of Rondo could take interest in what we're doing there, and then give us the tools, give us the insight, give us the support that we can build the type of foundation on history upon which our present and our future can be constructed. That is absolutely the least I can say, and I know there is so much more that needs to be said about the work you public historians are doing. It's vital, it's essential, and it gives communities like mine the opportunity to do things that seemed impossible 36 years ago. Since I've met Rebecca, we've made so much progress. And that progress is only going to lead to a more solid foundation, which we can hear about a little later on. My contribution to the history harvest was a story that had not been told before. It was a story about a group of men who decided, a group of 4 men, none of whom had gone to college, all of whom had worked for the railroad, either as a Pullman porter, as a waiter, as a cook, or as a red cap, all in the transportation industry. They had the audacity to believe that they could build a home in the Rondo community that people could live in, they could grow their children in, that they could bury their treasures in their attic or in their basement and become a part of their life. And for 10 years, these apartment homes were always filled with joy, filled with laughter, filled with serious business. And then one day a freeway roared through their homes and took them away. They have a thing in the United States called eminent domain. The government has the right to take your property. They can take your property for a public purpose, but they have to pay you just compensation. They just can't take it. They have to pay for it. And you have a right as a homeowner to say, this is the value of the property that you're taking from me. This is what we've put into it. This is what their value is now. And these gentlemen said, the value of our homes are $12,000 a piece. That's what we want for them. Those are the homes there. One is my father, one is my godfather, and the other two are people that I've known all of my life at the time. They were furnished in the event that you just were moving to St. Paul, and there they are. Total of 12. In response to their request for $12,000 per unit, they had been built for 10 years now. The government responded and said, your homes are worth about $2,500, $2,800 per unit. And they just fell apart. They have a right to challenge the government's valuation of your home. And they did. They challenged it against the supervisor. They lost. They went to the supervisor's head of the department. They lost. They went to the head of the division and they lost. They went one final effort. They raised the price from $2,800 to $3,500 per unit. And in one of the reports that we submitted, it said, had your buildings been more thoroughly constructed, had not they been inferiorly constructed, we would have given you more. And by that time, they ran out of money. They decided that they fought the good fight, and they signed over ownership of their property to the state of Minnesota. That was in 1958, the year I went away to college. Those properties stood vacant for 10 years. 10 years, because another legal thing in America is after 10 years, you lose your right to re-sue. It's called the statute of limitations. After the statute of limitations pass, you have no further rights in America. So what happened at the end of 10 years? Those were the apartments before. That's my bedroom there and after. What they did is they came in, they sawed these 12 units that were so inferiorly constructed that they were able to saw them in 2s and 3s, put them on flatbeds, and move them around the city of St. Paul, where 70 years later, they're still standing to this day. And that's their value now. Well over $300,000. That's the value that my father, my godfather said, you'll be able to build your life on. You go to college, you become someone that we can continue to do this. That was my story at the History Harvest, and there were more like that every day.
Mr. Anderson also brought in his first pay stub, so I urge you to find him afterward and challenge him to a game he likes to play called Paycheck Poker. The IFPH is not responsible when you get fleeced. Play at your own risk. Okay. So the History Harvest is basically an object-based oral history project disguised as an archive. And so as you just heard, the individual stories are powerful. Collectively, they are earth-shattering. So Joyce Williams brought in her grandmother's soup tureen and her great-grandmother's cookbook with the recipe her family still uses to make sweet potato pie. In her interview, Mrs. Williams transitioned seamlessly into a story about her favorite hill. She and the other neighborhood kids would climb up to the top after a good snow, sit on pieces of cardboard, and just fly downhill. And she told one of my students, "I just love that hill because it brings back so many memories." Margaret Lovejoy's parents owned a house on Rondo Avenue, torn down in 1973 to make way for an exit ramp that never even crossed the property. MnDOT put it up for sale in 1975, and Mrs. Lovejoy bought it back. She bought back land that should have been her inheritance. Mr. Anderson and his team estimate that the wealth gap resulting from home equity lost is $157 million. In the process of rebuilding her home, Mrs. Lovejoy found pieces of her old siding, and she saved it for over 50 years. Others brought in their grandfather's Pullman Porter hat, a 1920s pocket watch for service on the Great Northern Railway, a scrapbook of flyers from the 1970s meticulously taken off of telephone poles, a sack of marbles full of childhood joy. And over, Rondo residents told us, "I don't know if this is important, but," or, "I don't know if this is what you were looking for." It's difficult to get people who have never been told that their history is important to sit down for a long interview, but even the shyest person in a room will tell you what makes their keepsake valuable. And our first History Harvest was a success, but it was a test of me, of the idea, of the potential for a longer partnership. And our AI worried about losing control over their digital content. So they set up an instance of the archive and we transferred everything over to rememberingrondo.org. Now, Remembering Rondo is a project with legs. So like bits and pieces have appeared nationally on NPR, PolitiFact, Bloomberg, where my students appear as credit lines in Bloomberg. Like, how cool is that? It's very neat. And this is not just Mr. Anderson creating these transformative experiences for my students. This is also my students creating transformative media attention for Mr. Anderson. But Mr. Anderson's work does not begin, nor does it end with Remembering Rondo. His vision has spanned decades. So here he is again to tell you a little bit more about his work. You're on.
The History Harvest has given us this past, and the present of Rondo is in. We continued. Rondo was a place of joy, a place of music, a place of laughter, a place of sharing food. And one of the first things we did was hold an annual festival each year, 3 days, multi-day festival, where we invite everybody who lived in Rondo, who loves Rondo, Hmong, Somali, Korean, all of them, the Oromo were invited. They all have a wonderful mixture of food and music, and it's called the Rondo Day Festival. People come from back home for the festival. We've been able to build a plaza, a Rondo commemorative plaza, that commemorates the very first public memorial to a community that's been destroyed by a freeway. As Rebecca said, well over 900,000 communities. It was the largest migration of African Americans since the Great Migration, freeways moving people out of their communities, out of their homes, leaving them looking for replacement housing at a time when you could legally not rent to an African American person. Restrictive covenants were still in effect when most of these freeway things came through. And they had one idea being it was good for national defense, it was good for business, it was going to, but it gave rise to the suburban communities by the cars. And they went through the places where African Americans and other ethnic groups were living to create this morass that's still in existence today. And one of the devices that they had was to create, going back many, many years, calling them slums, calling them degraded areas, justifying their action on the grounds, we're going to make this place better for you, which never really happened. So what we're building now in Rondo is building on the festivals, building on the harvest history. We're going forward and we hope to reconnect Rondo. That's an image where we're going to build what we call a land bridge that's going to reconnect both sides of Rondo with about 25 acres of land in the Rondo corridor. We're in process of doing that now. We're hoping that here's a picture of somebody that might be able, if don't hear it from me, you never heard this, but that's that's a living history of Rondo. That play is written by somebody who lived in Rondo. We use community actors to perform it. There's the Rondo Commemorative Plaza. People are looking at it. On April 28th of this year, not only did they take our community away, they took the name Rondo away. And Rondo was named after Joseph Rondo, a French fur trader who was the wealthiest fur trader in the upper Midwest at our Fort Snelling. He married a Native American woman, and they told him, you can no longer live in the fort. You had to leave. This goes back to the 1800s. He took his money, he bought a plot of land. We didn't spell it like the French did. We made the EAU an O. And he said, anyone looking for a place to live who can afford it can move to Rondo. That's why it was so important to us. There's our governor, Tim Walz, at our annual Juneteenth ceremony. He comes every year. He's a very wonderful son of Rondo, we call him. Now he's a candidate for the presidency, the vice presidency of the United States. Governor, we have the land bridge project that we've been telling you about for the last 7 years. What are you going to do about it?
I learned more in one semester with that man than I think in my entire lifetime. And because I really didn't know what I was doing, I spent a lot of time looking for good role models. And so while there's excellent work in each of these 3 categories, searching for any combination of them gives you the void of doom. So using Rondo as a gold standard, I asked 2 friends to co-edit a book with me, which is the academic equivalent of like, let's start a band. It's called Digital Community Engagement, and it was designed to fill the void of doom. Mr. Anderson and I co-authored a chapter in there. It's all free, it's online, check it out. But after publication, we lost touch. I was building a new life in Cincinnati, learning my city, finding new friends, a new dentist. And my last phone call to Mr. Anderson was in May of 2020. The pandemic was settling upon us, but Zoom made it possible to do remote presentations. And somebody asked me to present about the history harvest. And I went to Remembering Rondo, and I found this. Our site was down. So I called Mr. A, who started peppering me with questions about Cincinnati. And then I come to find out that he had just had heart surgery, literally. Like, he had been awake for an hour. And I was like, why are you on the phone with me? Please get your rest. I'm good. And I thought I could circle back. And then 2 weeks later, George Floyd was murdered by police. 8 kilometers away, the Rondo community is no stranger to police violence. Police murdered one of their own, Philando Castile, in 2016. Mr. Floyd's murder set off international protests in the name of racial justice. There were over 500 protests in the United States, in all 50 states. People gathered outside of Capitol buildings, at Confederate monuments. They took to the streets, marching shoulder to shoulder, chanting, "No justice, no peace. I can't breathe." But in Minneapolis, Los Angeles, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Denver, Chicago, Austin, San Jose, Charlotte, New Orleans, Cincinnati, protesters shut down the highways. It's more than disruptive, it is symbolic. All of which is to say, a website going down was hardly a pressing issue. But our flagship project was gone. I was a little surprised, maybe naive. We followed the rules. We modeled a shared authority. We showed that academic institutions with long histories of extraction could do the opposite. We took every single practice available to us and we stretched it like a rubber band to fit our work. Yet, clearly we missed something. That rubber band snapped. A friend of mine died last September, my counterpart, I'm McAllister. And the day she died, I spent hours calling old colleagues, people I lost touch with. And I got to thinking about Mr. Anderson. I called him on a whim last October, and he said, "Have your ears been burning? I've talked about you twice this week. I want your help. I need the site back." Obviously, yes. But I did have a request. We had to figure out where our practices failed. We had to solve the problem, and we had to do it for everyone. One more time, Rondo had to become a lesson. Mr. Anderson is a magical community partner, and at least when we're in polite company, he says the same thing about me. But a sustainability plan that relies on the friendship of a single community partner and a single scholar is not a sustainability plan. So while Mr. Anderson is ageless, what happens when he dies? What happens if I die? We started with model practices for digital community engagement. I'm not going to go into detail here. Just be a good human. But perhaps we focus too much on community engagement and not enough on digital. In these projects, stakeholders and technology coexist in something we're starting to think of as a sustainable shared authority. The site going down is not actually the problem. Instead, we should be asking, how do we build community-centered layers of administrative redundancy? How do we define levels of access? What structure is nimble enough to accommodate the term limits of community leaders, the shifting institutional affiliations of faculty and staff, and the short-term involvement of student partners? Sustainability questions are not new. Platforms need maintenance, file extensions break, different technologies, sunrise and sunset. But when we have solicited the input of people who invested their time, energy, and personal history into a born digital platform, we have a different level of responsibility. The good news is that we're not starting from scratch. The SDSR is a series of modules designed to formulate complex sustainability plans. This is a really great baseline, but it still presumes that the digital projects will maintain an academic affiliation. We need protocols for 3 potential scenarios. 1, community projects independently conceived from the start. 2, communities who want to untether their projects from academic institutions. And 3, community projects housed in academic institutions with clear agreements about custody, rights, and lifespan. We also have to adjust our structures in the academy. This is also an evergreen issue. Faculty and staff engaging in community work are still beholden to the holy trinity of academia, research, teaching, service, in that order. Community projects defy that rigidity. How can we account for this in a way that does not relegate this scholarship to professional service? The act of remembering Rondo is a lesson. Rondo is a lesson in destructive urban practice and morally unsound law and policy. Rondo is a lesson about how a Black neighborhood built the infrastructure to thrive, and how outside powers took it upon themselves to replace that infrastructure with one of their own, one that served the city's white residents. Rondo is a lesson in grit and survival. Remembering Rondo is also a lesson. And Rondo keeps teaching. But Rondo is more than a lesson. It's more than the highway, and it's more than a website. Rondo is its residents, people with complicated lives and rich histories and struggles and laughter and generosity. And they have stories to share. Ensuring the next generation will have ongoing access to those stories where they can learn about and from their elders is fundamental to safeguarding the future of Rondo's past. Y'all have been a wonderful audience, and we're hoping that you have questions that we can answer. So while our hosts get ready to pass around the microphone, I am going to briefly hand you back to Mr. Anderson for some final thoughts.
Once again, I want to thank you. What you're watching here to my right is a product of Rebecca's work, who took a group of photographs that we had that were just musty and without real definition. And she was able to put them through your Omega or one of your products and transform these pictures, which represents well over 70 years of Rondo history, and clean them up in such a way that now we have the ability to bring people in for coffee or go to them and say, who is that person? Who's there? Who were they? What were you doing? What was happening? Now we can create a history of our community that goes beyond just the festival and all of the sad stories, but goes into the part of Rondo that rejuvenates us and keeps us alive, and becomes an example of how these public historians are taking communities like Rondo and giving them the foundation to move ahead into a whole new direction that they never thought possible. And for that, I thank Rebecca Wingo. I thank her not just from the bottom of my heart, but from the bottom of all of those people whose stories in Rondo would have been lost had not someone like this public life historian, Rebecca Wingo, come into our life, who talked about shared authority, who talked about getting it away from the institution, that it's yours, that you can build with it, and is willing to train and to work with our interns and our young people now so that they can keep this alive. I think what you're doing is an extraordinary, valuable component to the public history of communities. And I, for one, thank you for this opportunity to have the story of Rondo told before this august group of people. And I invite you, if you're ever in the city of St. Paul, to stop by and see us. We're going to be there for a very, very long time. So thank you so much. I want to thank my wife for being my travel partner. She's there somewhere, and there you are. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Thomas, Brigitte, and Valerie, everybody that's giving me their wonderful assistance. It's been a pleasure. Au revoir and bien nuit. Merci.
I think, yeah, I think, sorry, couldn't hear myself. I think Vanessa has a microphone and maybe you just shoot up your hand and she'll hand it to you. And I think that's how this works. And then we can go drink.
Thank you so much. I have a question for Mr. Anderson. It's fascinating how we've been hearing, and I have a question about the newcomers, the people who come to Rondo, who were not there in the 50s, were not there in the 60s. Can you tell us about how this project helps you to connect with the newcomers? Because we also think about people who went through that history. It's important for them to remember, but what about the newcomers, the young people? What do they say? How do they interact with the memories of past Rondo?
How are the new, like, how are you inviting them in?
Hello, can you hear me? The Rondo Commemorative Plaza has 26 panels. 26 panels, and each panel is about 6 feet high, 2.5 feet wide. And so what we've invited them to do, we were invited to come to Rondo back in the early 1900s by a group of Eastern European Jews that lived in Rondo and came to Rondo because they could get a place to stay there. They welcomed African-American people. The Orthodox Jews that lived in Rondo would often use African-American young people to come in and turn their lights out on Saturdays because they could not touch electricity. So I grew up next door to an Orthodox Jewish family. And when they moved out of Rondo because they had the ability to do so, they sold their stores and their businesses to African-American people. So that synergy was established right there. So when the Hmong came, when the Karen came, when the Oromo came and the Somalis came, they found themselves in Rondo as well. So what we did is took one panel, one panel was assigned to each of those new communities as a form of welcome. We were welcome. This is our public plaza. We want you to feel welcome here yourself. So you become a part of it. Tell us your journey here. Tell us how you arrived in Rondo. And that's how we've established a relationship between the 18 Clan Council, which is the Hmong governing body. I've spoke before them. It's how I met the Korean community. That's how I met the Somali community. And when we have Rondo Days, which is a 3-day celebration, we make sure that their vendors are there, that people come each year looking for that Hmong community that serves this beautiful, sweet drink that they buy and they sell out. The Somalis sell their meat. They have a certain way of making it. So it's that interchange is there. And we have to overcome some barriers, but because of religion and what have you, but at least we've established a respect for each other within the Rondo community that would not have been there had not we reached out. And the reason that we reached out is because other people reached out to us. So we're just keeping it going.
It's on? Okay. My name is Joanna Wojdon. I'm from the University of Wrocław in Poland. And my question is because you said that a lot of Black and also other ethnic communities were ruined because of the highway construction. I know of a couple of Polish American communities that were destroyed in Chicago, in San Antonio, in Connecticut, and so on. And do you know to what extent the Rondo project is unique and to what extent things like that happen also in those other communities that were also destroyed due to highway construction or other project of that kind?
It's a part of a pattern.
Is your commemoration, like all the projects that
the little small Rondo in St. Paul is the first of its kind. And so what we have done is we applied for a grant because we want to build a land bridge, something that's never been done before for this particular purpose. And all of the communities that over 140 communities applied for the same grant because they want to commemorate what happened in their community, because the freeway right now is a subject that people are looking. The freeways last 50 years, and we're right at the point now where freeways across the United States are starting to crumble. So people right now are trying to commemorate what happened to their community. And President Biden has said just setting money aside to reconnect communities. And we were successful in getting a $13 million planning grant for our project. And what we decided to do with that planning grant is to not to use it entirely for our project, but what we did is we funded an invitation to all of the people who did not get the grant to come to St. Paul to share their stories of how they want to use the money, if they ever get it, to commemorate their own community. And that was a very successful grant last year, because we had 43 communities attend our conference. When I returned in September, this is the second year of the conference, and we have close to 60 communities will be in St. Paul to talk about what they're doing. And the stories that they have are just amazing how pervasive and destructive freeway construction is in America. In Miami, it wiped out 10,000 homes. 10,000 homes were destroyed in Miami by freeway construction. 7,000 homes in Nashville, where if you look at the map, it goes this way, it goes that way to destroy an African-American community, and then it comes back. All of these stories need to be told so that the next generation of 50 years of freeway in America will not dare to touch upon a community of color, a community of natives, or a community of people that have not the power to stop this idiocy, but will band together to say, if you're going to build freeways for the next 50 years, you need to take these things into consideration. And we feel honored that we're the first city to invite others to come and say that, to express that point of view, and to hopefully be an example when our land bridge is built.
Thank you very much for your answer, Thorsten Logger, University of Hamburg. I had two questions. One was mainly answered, but I just want to remind that Hill Creek Valley neighborhood in St. Louis just suffered the same history and is building on this memory project a lot. So this may be one point to connect to. In St. Louis, the interstate also destroyed the old brewery district, which was a German migration hotspot in the early days. So there's much to tell and more groups that may be connected together. But my second question was because the interstate is kind of a fossil landmark and times are changing. So how are you connected to the climate movement? How do you connect to the people that may want to transfer to another kind of infrastructure past fossil infrastructure? Because this is what you do actually in the project you show.
So very similar to St. Louis. We can absolutely talk more about that. But regarding sort of the movement away from highways, and the trouble is they're always going to be there and they always need maintenance, right? So they're always going to be constructed. But even the infrastructure that it was designed to sort of circumvent that, like the green line that runs through, it runs just on Rondo's northern boundary. There's an efficiency that it has to meet regarding time. That's how all these like light rails work. They need you to get from point A to point B, from downtown St. Paul to downtown Minneapolis in what, 45 minutes, something like that? 47, because it's based on distance. And so the quickest way to do that is to take out stops. Guess where they didn't put any? Guess who had to petition to get them in there? Right? So even in these infrastructures that are designed to not be car driven, pun, we're still finding inequalities that require just constant, unending, and what I can only imagine is exhausting activism constantly.
St. Louis is coming to our conference. Did you mention St. Louis? Yeah, they'll be there. We've heard from them. But Rebecca is right. It's a constant vigilance. Transportation is so huge in America that there's a tendency to either cut corners or to make things work because that's the way they've always worked. And the recognition of public history or public lands or sacred lands is an impediment to get the job done. I mean, they have certain amount of miles that they need to construct each day in order to stay on time and on budget. And if I had to stop each time to take into consideration that landmark, that community, that sacred ground, we'll never get this damn thing built. So come on, let's go. We'll think about it. We'll make sure that we'll get it done, but Let's just keep moving, moving, moving. But we're coming to the end of the freeway in America. This is the last 50 years that you'll see such a thing. And perhaps by that time, they would have worked out these alternative ways, methods of traveling between different cities. So it improves the safety. I'm not sure. I won't be here, but I'm always reminded of Premier Khrushchev. It was Khrushchev who came to America and they wanted to show off the freeways to him. And they took him on a bridge and they said, look at these magnificent, magnificent roads we're building here. And his question was, where are the other 3 passengers? He said that 50, 60, 70 years ago. He said, what? Until we understand the whole idea of travel together, we have to conquer the idea of the first thing an American young man wants when he's 16 years old is, when can I get a car? When can I start driving? We have to learn how to reconstruct the inner city so people are willing to move there and live with people they move to the suburbs to get away from. So what's happening now is they're taking the lessons of moving people to make freeways, to take people into consideration when they rebuild them for the last time. And St. Louis is coming, and they have a lot of good ideas because we heard what happened down there. And their story is just as poignant and as sad as Rondo's.
Good evening. Yes? Okay, it's working. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joella van Donkersgoed, and I would first like to thank you so much for this presentation. It's very touching. I think other people may have been touched as well. It was very emotional to listen to your stories. And I therefore was wondering, I think it is very powerful as you are telling these stories that your emotion also conveys to us as a public. And I was wondering if you have, beyond harvesting these objects or making scans of these photographs, if you have also recorded the voices of these stories that people keep telling as they are still among us and are still being told, and if there are plans to integrate those narrated stories, so really the recordings of these stories in the future of remembering Rondo.
So our favorite part of the History Harvest Archive, which was built in Emeka, is that they're all sound-bited. Sound bit? I don't think either of those is a word. So when you go, to the recorded, thank you, Mr. Anderson. When you go to see any of the objects in the archive, and the only working version of the archive, ironically, is the one that's at McAllister, and they won't take it down. They've promised to keep it up until we figure out what we're doing. But when you go to Joyce Williams' Soup Tureen, you click on the audio and you can hear her tell the story herself. That's why I say it's an object-based oral history disguised as an archive. Like, it's actually an oral history project, but through objects inside of an archive shell. And that's the best part. But then, like, when you talk to Mr. Anderson, he always is talking about what else we need to do, what stories we need to get before the people who can, all of those pictures that were up there when y'all were coming in. Mr. Anderson was standing here with me going, oh, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. I don't know, I can't remember her name. Where was that taken? Right, and there are people who remember. So there's an urgency to that kind of work. And so we were brainstorming, we were like, what about a photo Friday? Just bring people in and they can identify folks. And like your project, Joella, that's got the ability to identify online, but also like do it in person. And we were talking about getting a history harvest station up and running at our code so people can bring in their objects and have them digitize and record the stories on site. at their own convenience and not just on this one-day event, you know? So it's a great question, and we're really working hard to think about how we people it
And sustain it.
and
And sustain it, because
sustainable shared authority.
Rebecca has been just a bright light for me, because she has such great ideas, and as most of you public historians have, you make these connections and you stimulate thinking. And in our Memorial Plaza, we have 700 bricks. 700 bricks, and we call it a history walk. And we have 3 lines of 14 characters per line. And we've asked people to take time and purchase a brick, but put 3 lines on there. And you can say whatever you want as long as it doesn't exceed 14 characters per line for 3 lines. And then we put it in the ground every September. It'll be September 19th. And I've looked back on it now. This is our 5th, 6th year, and we're approaching 300 bricks in the ground. And I walk through this time of year to see where the new ones are going to go. And I run across an inscription that says, Charles Snooky Duke. Unbelievable. And I say to myself, I wonder why he was unbelievable. What about Snooky was so unbelievable that someone decided that that's the inscription that they want to put in the ground? And Rebecca said, let's find out. Let's invite them to submit a paragraph. And if they don't want to submit a paragraph or a photograph, let's make an audio recording. And let's open it up so that people can see how people have remembered the people in our history walk. So it's not just a walk, but it becomes a living testament to a community that lived and lives on in the memories of those who can share it. And that's that someone spoke about being in these conferences, being around people who think like you. An idea can be triggered, and if you have a partner like Rebecca, you have a really good chance when we go back, that's going to happen. And that's the beauty of these conferences. Where are we going next? But that's a great question. We remember them, and we're going to try to make them much more accessible and sustainable so that we can teach young people how to keep this momentum that we got going alive.
Hi, my name's Jerome DeGroot. I work in the University of Manchester in the UK. And my question's from the point of view of universities, really. It's really, these kinds of projects are incredibly time consuming, long term. They have to be, and to make them sustainable, absolutely, you have to commit. That's incredibly at odds with the way that universities work nowadays. And particularly if you're a precarious, early career scholar, trying to situate yourself in this type of way is incredibly difficult. So my question is for Rebecca, really, to ask about kind of advice you might have to ways I might talk to, for instance, my doctoral students, my postdoctoral colleagues, my early career colleagues, about how to commit to work like this when you yourself do not know whether you're going to be in a place for a while, when you yourself are having pressure to publish or to get a grant, and to get a grant that's probably only going to fund you for maybe 1 or 2 years. None of our structures are set up to do this. And so I guess my question is both, how can we help people to do this better, but also what do we need to change? That's quite a big question, sorry.
Oh, that's just an easy one. So you're totally right. There's a line that I have in our book chapter that says, and what I'm getting at here is that your question is an ethical one. This is a question of ethics. But what I wrote, I think, was something like, when we parachute into communities and leave, we replicate the same problems that marginalized them in the first place, right? Like we have a responsibility. And so I think your question is one about ethics. And I was a postdoc and I did not know that I would have a job. And if I did have a job, where would it be? And I used all 3 years of my postdoc trying to find one. So I told Mr. Anderson that from the beginning. I didn't know how long I would be there. I didn't know how long I could oversee the work. So the method that I kind of devised was not just like that level of transparency, but it was to think about these community-based projects in small pieces. We could do 1 semester of a history harvest, and that was our agreement. Then I was there for year 2. And Mr. Anderson wanted another one. So I said, okay, well, this time, why don't I train one of my colleagues so you have someone to do this? And we trained up Crystal Moten, who is now at she's at the Obama Presidential Library. She's a curator there. Yeah. Well, she moved on too. But I introduced Mr. Anderson to the director of our Civic Engagement Center, and I was like, these are your people. When I leave, go here, right? And so I trained up another person to do it, and y'all did that for another like 3 or 4 years. And then in the meantime, you were like, I got another small chunk for you. Can you make a map of all of our historic businesses? And I was like, of course. So I figured that out. And that was another small chunk. So we've been working in these small chunks in order to sort of allow for that short term or long term. But I think when you are ethical about the choices that you're making as a scholar, it leads to this, right? So we started this 9 years ago. We were so much younger. And a lot has changed, and we're still here because we are responsible to each other. I have found myself responsible to 3 distinct communities right now. Rondo, the Wyandotte Nation. They were the last tribe removed from my state in 1843, and I've been working with them on a commemorative trail. We just got our first historic marker approved. It's super dope. And then my third is the Apsáalooke Nation in Montana. And I woke up one morning and I was like, wait, what? It's too much. I am stretched too thin. And so I've been saying no to other opportunities because I need to see these through to their completion. And so that's both advice and like not advice all at the same time. I'm so sorry.
And the recipients, we community groups need to step up as well. And we need to prepare ourselves for the eventual, because we can't hold on to Rebecca forever or Crystal Moten. They have to move on. And I think we have a plan now we have a focus, and I think this is at a point where we can hire permanent staff to keep this going as long as funding. Someone mentioned funding earlier. Funding is critical to this because this is serious work. And we need to train ourselves to move forward on it. You've given us the tools. It's like if you give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. But if you teach a person how to do it, you feed them for a lifetime. So that sort of relationship needs to be deepened. It needs to be created, it needs to be deepened. And we need to take responsibility for doing some of the work on ourselves. The ideas come from you guys, but you've given us tools now that we didn't have before. You're teaching us how to use this Omega, these various, I can have somebody train with Rebecca 1 or 2 times, and then they'll be ready to go and only contact her when they absolutely need to do that. But I hope you historians, public historians know in teaching us that you don't abandon us, but you just stay on the ready, on the call when you need us, when you need me, so that we can develop these skills within the community on our own and learn how this sharing of authority, how these tools work to our benefit can continue to grow our communities back to where they belong before all of this destruction occurred. But we can't do it without you. And we're not willing to let you go away right now. So don't think you're off the hook. We're going to call on you and we're going to tell all of our friends about you in a way. And we hope that you all answer the call that these communities are making, because what you're doing really, really helps them help themselves.
Andreas Etkes, I teach US history and public history in Munich, Germany. Thank you very much for sharing this very impressive and important project. I have a question that's maybe not totally fair to you, but you already mentioned Native Americans. And I mean, the whole history of the United States in some ways is built on forcefully removing people who had been there before. So in your project, how far did you go back? Did you think about who had been there before you even? I know that's not the main story there, but have you been thinking about this? Have you thought about incorporating that maybe with one of the signs that what Native groups had been there before? So that this place has a much longer history of people forcibly being moved out of there.
Good question. Very good question. I haven't thought about it as much as I wanted to. I haven't thought about it as much as it needs to be thought about because, again, like all of you, I've taken on this project with the land bridge, and it's taking a lot of time away from my other role. And there's got to be a reckoning has to come within me, which am I going to be able to do? Because this land bridge is really, really getting close to a realization that we never even dreamed would happen. It's very important. We hope to build over 200 homes on it. We hope to establish at least 1,500 permanent jobs. We hope to have a cultural center, a Rondo cultural center. We hope to have an amphitheater for our festival. We hope to have transform all of the Memorial Plaza over there. We're working with the school, and we're trying to land a major tenant, which would be a public library, to take out a 25-year lease on the land bridge if we build it, and connecting that up with an elementary school. So that project is becoming much larger than what needs to be done on this history side. And that's something I'm going to have to deal with. It's a good question. And you're making me think, why did you even come here tonight and ask me that? That's a good one.
So one of the most impressive things about working with Mr. Anderson is how receptive he is. So I can basically guarantee you that he's going to go home and it's going to fester and then it's going to happen. And the first time I ever saw it was actually Mindy Full-of-Love, the woman who wrote this book called Root Shock. Mr. Anderson invited her to come to the Rondo community, and they were having a conversation before he even built the plaza. So the plaza had been sort of conceived. They got a grant for the property, the last piece of undeveloped property along Old Rondo Avenue, now just Rondo Avenue, as of the renaming. And, you know, Mr. Anderson presented everything, and Dr. Full-of-Love said, "That's nice. Who's going to come?" And Mr. Anderson said, what do you mean? Who's going to come? Like, this is our history. And she goes, yeah, but how is it relevant to the community that's here now? That's relevant to you, but you're not the only one here. And then he created this whole thing where he invited in all of these communities to curate their own panels and tell their own stories. So we haven't done it yet. And then the other thing, and you're absolutely right, and I work extensively with Native communities, so totally get it. There's so much urgency in the Rondo story because people are dying. And the story of that never took precedence for us.
Right. It didn't, and it needs to. It's a great question. When you come into St. Paul, we will fester on that, and I have a great partner here. We'll come up with some ideas that how to address it, because it is an excellent question, and managing time, which I never thought I would be thinking about at this stage of my life, how to separate yourself, and when one project gets to be so much into your life, how do you rebalance yourself so that you don't forget about some of the other things? But that's becoming a little bit more difficult now that we're talking $374 million total project cost. And that's something that we said we will build. We will be the first community to build it. And I think they would like to give us the money so that we could fail, so that no other community would be able to build on our success. And that's becoming an issue that we think about each day. Why are they interested in us now? And is it to fail, or is it to succeed? I mean, that's something we think about every day. We hope to address it in our conference on the 19th. Success or failure. That's a big issue for land bridge, because now there are already land bridges. There's over 90 land bridges in the United States, but no one looks at them as economic and cultural engines. There's a land bridge in Boston. They call it the Big Dig. It's basically a $5 billion project. No one looked back on that because it was just a transportation land bridge. Ours is not even close to that. But because we are articulating a correction of history, calling into attention how you separated our community, why don't you give us the same amount of money to rebuild our community that you use to destroy us? Sure, we'll give you the money. But what does that mean now? What kind of onus does that place upon this community-driven project for all the other ones who want to build and reconnect their community? So some things are being left on the table, and that's not fair. And I'll acknowledge that. But I hope to change that.
Well, those were wonderful final words, and I think you deserve both a very long round of applause for sharing.